It began on a quiet Sunday morning in a neighborhood that prided itself on being safe, orderly, and exclusive. The kind of place where lawns were measured to perfection and porch flags were chosen to signal belonging. To outsiders, the community of Crestwood Lakes was a picture of suburban peace. But beneath that calm surface simmered something ugly, an obsession with control. At the center of this story was a man named Elias Ward. To his neighbors, he was quiet, polite, and private, the kind of man who waved once, then went about his day. To those who truly knew him, though, Elias was something far more than that. But no one in Crestwood Lakes knew. Not yet. Elias had moved into the neighborhood just 3 months earlier, drawn by its peaceful setting and proximity to the forest trails he loved to run. His house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modern, modest home with a brick facade and a porch swing that creaked in the evening wind. From the beginning, he sensed the eyes on him, curtains shifting, whispers over fences, slow cars passing twice on his street. He'd been through this before. The Homeowners Association, led by a woman named Gloria, ruled Crestwood Lakes with an iron clipboard. She was the kind of person who loved to announce authority even when none was given. Residents whispered that she'd once called animal control because someone's garden gnome looked aggressive. And for her, Elias was an enigma, a man who didn't attend HOA meetings, didn't join the neighborhood social page, and didn't respond when she politely suggested he repaint his mailbox to the official color code. Her irritation festered. It grew into suspicion. When Elias started working on his backyard, shed a project he'd gotten approved in writing, Gloria decided he was building something unregistered. She convinced herself he was up to something illegal and began calling her. Small circle of HOA, loyalists to look into it. What they saw, or thought they saw, only fueled her paranoia. A few late-night deliveries, a reinforced door in his shed, and security cameras mounted discreetly around the property. To them, that looked like someone hiding something. To Elias, it was standard security protocol. But Gloria didn't see nuance, she saw a threat. And one evening, as she sat sipping wine with her self-appointed neighborhood watch, she made a fateful declaration. If the police won't act, we will. That night, the HOA Security Task Force was born. They weren't police, but they dressed the part. Old uniforms bought online, fake badges pinned to their shirts, and radios tuned to static just to sound official. To detain Elias and turn him over to the real authorities for suspicious activity. It was absurd, illegal, dangerous, but none of them realized just how dangerous he was. Elias spent that Sunday morning the same way he always did, jogging before sunrise, coffee on the porch, then working quietly in his shed. The shed itself was more than it appeared. Behind its wooden walls was a concealed workspace where Elias maintained his field equipment, surveillance gear, encrypted communication tools, and classified case files. Because Elias Ward wasn't just an ordinary homeowner, he was a special agent in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to one of the most sensitive counterintelligence units in the country. His work had dismantled criminal syndicates, uncovered espionage networks, and once led to the capture of an assassin who'd evaded law enforcement for years. His career was a shadow, his identity guarded by clearance codes and sealed records. But today, in the eyes of his neighbors, he was just a guy who didn't follow the HOA rules. Around noon, the fake officers assembled near the community park, 4 men and 1 woman, led by Gloria herself. They rehearsed their lines, practiced their entry procedure, and even prepared a citation notice with Crestwood Lakes letterhead. Their plan was to confront Elias, accuse him of building without authorization, and place him under HOA custody. They thought they were playing authority. They were about to step into something real. Elias noticed the movement before they even reached his driveway. Through the lens of one of his hidden cameras, he saw them, the uniforms, the badges, the posture of people pretending to be something they weren't. He didn't react outwardly. He simply locked his shed door, set down his mug, and waited. When Gloria's group marched up his path, Elias was already at his front gate, calm as ever. They began their act, holding up fake badges, barking orders, and demanding to inspect his property. He said nothing, only stepped aside slightly, letting their bravado fill the silence. What none of them saw was the small black device in his pocket, a covert recorders streaming everything directly to a secure cloud server. As they grew louder, Elias made mental notes. Every face, every word, every lie. He could have stopped them then, revealed his badge, and ended the farce. But he didn't, because something about their arrogance told him it wasn't just about him, it was about power. About how easily people believed they could play God when they wore the illusion of authority. When Gloria ordered two men to search the premises, Elias finally spoke not to argue, but to ask one simple question. Who authorized this? Their answers sealed their fate. One of the men said, "We did. HOA police." Elias almost smiled. He stepped back, gave them enough space to hang themselves further, and observed quietly as they moved around his yard, filming and threatening to issue fines. When one of them tried to force open his shed door, Elias knew it was time. Within seconds, his calm expression shifted into something colder, not anger, not fear, but the kind of command presence that made even trained agents straighten up. His tone changed, his eyes hardened, and the air itself seemed to thicken around him. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and flipped it open, revealing the unmistakable golden badge of the FBI. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. Gloria's jaw dropped, the fake officers froze, and for the first time, they realized they hadn't been in control of anything at all. Elias looked at them steadily, then spoke quietly, but with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. What he said next made them wish they'd never stepped foot on his property. But that moment, that single second of truth, was only the beginning. Because what happened after would shake the entire community, draw in real law enforcement, and expose a web of deceit that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Crestwood Lakes had always thought it could police itself. Now, the real law was about to arrive. The moment Elias Ward revealed his badge, everything changed. The air turned electric, filled with the heavy silence that follows when authority collides with arrogance. The 5 self-appointed HOA officers stood frozen on his lawn, faces drained of color. Gloria clutched her fake badge like a shield, trembling but still too proud to back down. Elias said nothing at first. He simply watched them, eyes sharp, unblinking, assessing. His presence alone was enough to dismantle the illusion they had built. The once confident posturing of these suburban vigilantes melted into panic. The weight of reality began to sink in. They had just impersonated law enforcement, attempted an unlawful entry, and threatened a federal agent on his own property. Elias stepped closer, calm and deliberate, every movement calculated. His voice remained low, professional, and chillingly controlled as he informed them that they were being recorded, every word, every action, every threat. Then, in one motion, he tapped his phone and sent a silent alert. Within minutes, the nearest federal field office received a notification marked Urgent False Law Enforcement Incident, Crestwood Lakes. But Elias didn't need backup to handle what came next. He knew the psychology of people like Gloria, people who thought authority was something you could perform, not earn. They wanted control, not justice. And now, stripped of their illusion, they were spiraling into excuses. Gloria stammered about community safety, claiming Elias was acting suspiciously, building things off the record. One of her followers tried to back her up, insisting they had a right to ensure neighborhood compliance. Elias listened in silence, letting them talk because their words would be evidence later. Every lie they spoke dug them deeper. When they finally ran out of excuses, he gave them the kind of look that could dismantle a person's composure without a word. Then, slowly, he told them to leave. They hesitated, looking for a way out that wouldn't make them appear defeated. But there was no saving face now. Elias reminded them they had committed multiple federal offenses and that every second they lingered increased the likelihood of being detained. They scattered like frightened birds. As Gloria retreated down the street, she turned back, once her expression a mix of humiliation and fury. She'd built her identity on being the queen of Crestwood Lakes, the unchallenged voice of order. But now, she'd picked a fight with someone far above her understanding. And though she didn't yet realize it, her every move from this point on would be under federal scrutiny. Elias closed his gate and returned inside, but his calm exterior concealed the calculations already racing through his mind. This wasn't just about a personal insult or neighborhood harassment. Impersonating a police officer was a federal crime. He'd seen people do it for power, for control, for intimidation. But this was deeper. Gloria's operation had structure, uniforms, coordination. It wasn't spontaneous. Something about it felt organized. That night, Elias sat in his home office, reviewing the recorded footage from his security system. He analyzed every frame, faces, license plates, body language. He uploaded the data to an encrypted server, then began drafting an internal memo marked Preliminary Incident Report, Possible Coordinated HOA Vigilante Activity. He'd seen cases where self-appointed neighborhood groups became recruitment grounds for extremist organizations, their obsession with control morphing into something far more dangerous. Was Crestwood Lakes part of something like that? The next morning, Elias woke early to find two unmarked vehicles parked discreetly near the entrance of the subdivision. His alert had been received. His colleagues from the bureau had arrived not in sirens or uniforms, but in quiet, methodical precision. They were there to observe, gather intelligence, and verify everything he'd documented. As they coordinated from a distance, Elias played his part, the silent resident who went about his morning routine while keeping eyes on the ground. From his porch, he noticed the shift in atmosphere around the neighborhood. Whispers moved faster than wind. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one knew what. Gloria tried to regain control. That afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting, spinning the story to her advantage. She claimed Elias had overreacted, intimidated her volunteers, and fabricated the whole badge incident. But several members who'd seen the footage online shared quietly by witnesses weren't convinced. The cracks in her influence began to spread. By the third day, federal investigators had collected enough data to confirm the seriousness of the situation. The impersonation wasn't just a harmless stunt. The fake badges Gloria's group used were modeled after local sheriff designs, complete with serial numbers and insignias that suggested access to restricted materials. That wasn't something an ordinary HOA leader could find easily. Someone had supplied them. Elias knew what that meant. The incident wasn't about neighborhood control anymore. It hinted at infiltration, someone feeding Gloria's obsession with power for their own agenda. Whether it was a disgruntled ex-cop, a political radical, or a local militia sympathizer, he didn't know yet, but the pattern was familiar. That evening, as dusk fell, Elias sat in his dimly lit office, analyzing the recovered metadata from Gloria's task force emails. Hidden beneath layers of poorly encrypted attachments, he found something that made him stop cold. A string of digital fingerprints traced back to an online forum known for spreading anti-government rhetoric and organizing community enforcement groups. The Crestwood Lakes HOA hadn't gone rogue by accident. It had been groomed. Elias leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization settling over him. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood dispute. It was a potential domestic threat hiding in plain sight behind garden hedges and property codes. He reported his findings to his bureau contact under a new file name, Operation Suburbia. But while Elias prepared to take down something far bigger than Gloria imagined, she was plotting too. Humiliated, cornered, and paranoid, she started reaching out to the same shadowy contacts that had once fed her delusions of authority. This time, she wasn't just trying to reclaim control of the HOA, she wanted revenge. By the end of the week, strange vehicles began appearing at the edges of the neighborhood again, not federal cars this time, but tinted trucks with no plates. Gloria's allies had arrived. Elias watched from his window as night fell over Crestwood Lakes. The streetlights flickered on, the air still and heavy with tension. He'd seen this pattern before, arrogance turning into desperation. Small lies, mutating into chaos. He knew it was only a matter of time before the line between neighborhood enforcement and armed confrontation blurred completely. And when that happened, Crestwood Lakes would no longer be the peaceful community it pretended to be. Because the fake police hadn't just picked the wrong man, they'd awakened the kind of force that doesn't forgive or forget. The air in Crestwood Lakes had changed. The once pristine streets, lined with trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes, now carried an invisible weight, the kind that only comes when people start whispering behind closed doors. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways now crossed the street to avoid each other. Lawns remained perfectly green, but the sense of peace had wilted. At the center of this quiet chaos was Gloria Went, the self-declared queen of the neighborhood. After the humiliating encounter with Elias Ward, she vanished from public view for a few days. Her usual morning patrols stopped. The HOA bulletin went silent. People assumed she'd finally calmed down. But what they didn't know was that Gloria wasn't hiding, she was organizing. Inside her two-story home, the one with the white porch and the American flag that never touched the ground, Gloria had transformed her dining room into something she proudly called the HOA War Room. The long oak table was covered in binders, maps of the subdivision, and a corkboard littered with pinned photos and scribbled notes. At the center of it all sat a printout of Elias's property marked with circles, arrows, and red ink that looked almost obsessive. She had convinced herself she was right, that Elias was the enemy, that his badge was fake, that he was part of some deep state scheme to spy on her community. The irony of her delusion was lost on her. To Gloria, reality bent to her will, and anyone who challenged her authority was automatically wrong. Her loyalists trickled in over the following days, the same four who had joined her in the fake arrest. Despite the fear that had gripped them since that day, Gloria's manipulation was strong. She fed them a new story, that Elias had connections in law enforcement because he was corrupt, not official, that the footage of his badge was doctored, that they had been set up. In small towns and gated communities, paranoia spreads faster than truth. By the end of the week, her core team was back under her spell, convinced that they were victims of a federal smear campaign. Gloria promised them she had a plan to restore order, a plan that involved more than HOA letters or petty fines. She wanted to expose Elias publicly. Meanwhile, Elias continued his quiet investigation. From his home office, he monitored encrypted communications and intercepted online chatter connected to the digital fingerprints he'd uncovered earlier. Every hour brought new data confirming his suspicion. Gloria's fake security team had been guided by a fringe online network masquerading as a community safety coalition. The Bureau had seen groups like this before: suburban, vigilante clusters that thrived on misinformation, turning neighbors against each other in the name of law and order. They recruited people like Gloria easily, the kind who needed power but lacked restraint. Elias's role now was twofold: contain the threat locally and build a case strong enough to expose the network behind it. But Gloria was already accelerating. One evening, after most of the neighborhood lights had gone out, her small group gathered in the war room. A laptop sat open at the center of the table, connected to a grainy video call. On the other end was a man whose face was obscured, a voice modulated to hide its tone. He called himself Commander Ridge. He was the same individual who'd once mailed Gloria the fake badges, convincing her that Crestwood Lakes needed its own enforcement branch. Now, he promised to help her take back control. The conversation was short but revealing. Ridge instructed Gloria to start collecting personal information about problem residents: names, addresses, vehicle details, security systems. He promised that help would arrive soon to deal with infiltrators. Gloria, lost in her delusion of heroism, agreed eagerly. Elias intercepted fragments of that call through a signal trace, not enough to identify Ridge, but enough to recognize the danger. He immediately contacted his field office, urging them to prepare for a containment operation. The threat had escalated. What began as suburban theater was on the verge of becoming a federal security concern. The next morning, Gloria made her move. She posted a lengthy, incendiary message on the HOA's private online forum, a digital tirade accusing Elias of spying, harassment, and posing as a government agent. She framed herself as the victim of a conspiracy, claiming that she and her team were wrongly accused patriots. Within hours, her message spread like wildfire. Some residents ignored it. Others, fueled by fear or bias, began to question who Elias really was. Elias watched it unfold in silence. He knew better than to engage. He'd seen disinformation at work, how one confident lie could unravel the truth faster than evidence could repair it. His strategy was patience, surveillance, documentation, exposure at the right moment. But patience was something Gloria didn't have. By the weekend, The war room had evolved into something darker. The maps now included color-coded pins marking which residents were loyal and which were suspected. They began running patrols again, late-night drives around the community in unmarked SUVs. They called themselves the Crestwood Neighborhood Enforcement Unit. What they didn't realize was that every one of their movements was being tracked. Elias had discreetly installed motion sensors and camera drones throughout the subdivision, feeding real-time data to his encrypted dashboard. He wasn't just watching Gloria, he was documenting a case that could dismantle the entire network behind her. But there was one thing Elias didn't anticipate. Gloria had been digging too. Using contacts she'd met through Ridge, she managed to acquire restricted public data, old property records, vehicle registration details, and even an old partial personnel file. When she found Elias's name in connection with the Bureau, her paranoia confirmed itself. To her, that wasn't proof of his legitimacy, it was evidence that he was a plant. That night, she printed his photo, pinned it to her corkboard, and scrawled across it in red ink, "Investigate and expose." The following morning, Elias noticed an unfamiliar drone hovering near his property line. It wasn't one of his. He tracked its signal back to a nearby street directly to Gloria's address. She had crossed into surveillance warfare. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was a power struggle, one between delusion and discipline, between a woman desperate to cling to control and a man trained to dismantle chaos without leaving fingerprints. But as Elias gathered the last piece of evidence he needed to bring the situation to federal attention, Gloria's group made a reckless choice. Convinced Elias was preparing something dangerous in his shed, they decided to strike first. They began planning another operation, not with badges this time, but with flashlights, radios, and more aggression. The war room buzzed with nervous excitement as Gloria laid out the blueprint. She called it Operation Neighborhood Cleanse. The objective: expose the infiltrator before he acts. Her team nodded, their fear drowned by conviction. They didn't realize they were about to walk straight into a real federal operation already in motion. Because Elias wasn't waiting anymore. He was setting a trap. And this time, when the HOA task force came to his door, they wouldn't find a quiet man on a porch. They'd find the Bureau itself waiting for them. The night was still when it began, one of those thick, oppressive silences that hang over quiet suburbs before something breaks. Crestwood Lake slept under a pale moon, its cul-de-sacs bathed in soft orange from the streetlights. Sprinklers ticked in the distance. Porch lights glowed like sentinels. And behind those manicured lawns, something dark was brewing. Inside Gloria Went's home, the so-called HOA war room, her small group huddled around a cluttered table. The air was tense, charged with adrenaline and delusion. Stood at the head of the room, clipboard in hand, eyes gleaming with manic determination. On the table lay a rough sketch of Elias Ward's property, marked with arrows, notes, and highlighted paths. To Gloria, this wasn't trespassing, it was a mission. To her loyalists, it was proof of loyalty. They truly believed they were defending their neighborhood from a dangerous infiltrator. In reality, they were about to walk headfirst into a federal sting. Elias had spent the last 48 hours preparing for this moment. Every piece of intelligence he'd gathered was now feeding into a coordinated operation run quietly from an unmarked Bureau command vehicle parked a few blocks away. The plan was simple. Let Gloria and her group incriminate themselves completely. Capture everything on record. End the threat without bloodshed. But nothing in Gloria's world was ever simple. At exactly 11:47 p.m., two black SUVs rolled slowly down Pine Ridge Lane with their headlights off. Inside were 5 members of Gloria's neighborhood enforcement unit, armed with flashlights, radios, and makeshift batons. Their voices crackled softly through cheap earpieces as they whispered instructions. Gloria rode in the lead car, staring ahead, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "This is for Crestwood," she murmured to herself. From inside his home, Elias watched them approach on his security feed. Calm, focused. His monitors displayed every angle of his property: infrared, thermal, motion sensors. He knew exactly where they'd enter, how they'd move, and when to intercept. He adjusted his earpiece and spoke quietly into his comms. "Target group is mobile. Phase 1 commencing. Several blocks away, agents in plain clothes received his signal and began their silent approach, moving through the shadows on foot, unseen. Their goal wasn't confrontation, it was containment. At 11:56 p.m., Gloria's group parked near the end of Elias's street and cut their engines. The night swallowed the sound. They slipped out, flashlights flicking on in coordinated rhythm. Every step they took, from the whisper of gravel underfoot to the low hum of their radios, was recorded by Elias's hidden microphones. They approached the fence line, whispering nervously. One of the men hesitated, muttering that this felt wrong. Gloria shot him a glare sharp enough to silence him. "Stay focused," she hissed. "We're exposing a threat." They didn't know that the only threat standing in the dark was themselves. As they reached Elias's backyard, one man cut through the latch with a bolt cutter. The soft metallic click echoed in the night. Elias watched it happen on his monitor, unblinking. He pressed a button. Instantly, the security lights around his property flashed on in blinding brilliance. The intruders froze, caught like animals in a snare. A voice echoed through a hidden intercom, calm, steady, commanding. "You are trespassing on federal property. Do not move." Panic rippled through the group. One of them dropped his flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the yard. Gloria shouted for them to scatter, but before they could move, the quiet hum of approaching vehicles filled the street. From both ends of the cul-de-sac, unmarked bureau cars rolled in, their high beams cutting through the darkness. Within seconds, agents in tactical vests emerged, their voices precise and measured. "Federal agents, hands where we can see them." The HOA police were no longer pretending. They were now facing the real thing. Elias stepped out from his front door, flanked by two agents. His expression was unreadable, calm but cold. In his hand was a tablet displaying live footage of Gloria and her team breaking onto his property. It was over before it even began. Gloria tried to speak, but her voice cracked under pressure. She insisted it was all a misunderstanding, that they were conducting a community inspection. The agents didn't buy it. The uniforms, the badges, the trespassing, all caught on multiple cameras. It was enough for several serious charges, including impersonating law enforcement and attempted illegal entry. As her team was cuffed one by one, Gloria stood trembling, still trying to cling to her illusion of power. She accused Elias of setting her up, of planting evidence. Her words spiraled into incoherence, desperation replacing arrogance. Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. When the last of her group was placed in the back of a bureau vehicle, Gloria's voice broke into a scream, not of fear, but of disbelief. For the first time in years, her power meant nothing. The HOA queen had fallen, not with defiance, but with confusion, unable to understand how the world she controlled had turned against her so completely. But for Elias, the operation was only half finished. Later that night, as the flashing lights faded and the street returned to silence, he sat once again in his home office, reviewing the captured data. Among Gloria's confiscated files were several encrypted messages sent from the mysterious Commander Ridge. The metadata pointed to a regional hub in another state, one already under investigation for domestic infiltration schemes. Elias realized Crestwood Lakes wasn't just an isolated case. It was part of a network, a testing ground for manipulating local power structures. A pattern of radicalization hidden behind homeowners associations and community enforcement rhetoric. As dawn broke over the neighborhood, the quiet returned. But the illusion of peace was gone. Crestwood Lakes was no longer the picture-perfect suburb it once pretended to be. Neighbors avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice the FBI vehicles that had lined their streets overnight. And though the immediate threat was neutralized, Elias knew it wasn't over. Commander Ridge was still out there. The digital fingerprints led to more names, more locations, more communities, quietly festering with the same disease of control and paranoia. Gloria Went had been a pawn, a suburban zealot unknowingly serving a darker cause. But now that pawn had been removed from the board, it was time to go after the hand that moved her. Elias closed his laptop, his reflection faintly visible in the darkened screen. The job wasn't done. It had only evolved. The HOA drama that began with fake badges and neighborhood rules had uncovered something that reached far beyond white fences and meeting minutes. The suburbs had become the new front line, and Elias Ward was ready for the next phase. The arrests at Crestwood Lakes should have ended the story, but for Elias Ward, the calm that followed was only surface deep. Beneath the neat lawns and nervous smiles of his neighbors, something darker was moving, something that had been there long before Gloria tried to play cop. The morning after the operation, the neighborhood looked like a crime scene scrubbed clean too soon. The yellow tape was gone, the bureau vans had rolled out, and residents were already pretending nothing had happened. But everyone knew. Eyes lingered on Elias's house as if it were cursed, some out of fear, others out of resentment. The man who had quietly kept to himself was now the most infamous figure in Crestwood Lakes. Still, Elias didn't care about gossip. His focus was on what came next. In his home office, now converted into a full operational command point, the walls were covered in maps, digital screenshots, and case notes. At the center of it all was a single name: Commander Ridge, the faceless manipulator who had fueled Gloria's delusions, supplied her with counterfeit materials, and possibly orchestrated similar operations in other communities across the country. Ridge's voice, distorted in the intercepted recordings, was calm, persuasive, and methodical. It had the tone of someone who understood psychology, who knew how to prey on fear, conformity, and the hunger for control. Elias had heard that tone before. He'd heard it in interrogations with domestic extremists. He'd heard it in propaganda videos meant to recruit the unstable. And now, it was seeping into America's quietest neighborhoods. Over the next several days, Elias coordinated with his bureau contact, Special Agent Lillian Knox, to analyze the encrypted data recovered from Gloria's laptop. What they found chilled them both. The Crestwood Lakes incident was just one node in a vast network of online community watch groups, digital enclaves masquerading as civic organizations, but functioning as breeding grounds for vigilantism and control. At least 14 similar incidents had occurred in the past year, all starting the same way. An online influencer preaching about taking back the neighborhood, recruiting frustrated HOA members, and feeding them doctored, legal templates to justify their authority. And in each case, the digital breadcrumbs pointed back to the same source, a private server hosted under an alias connected to Ridge. Elias's suspicion hardened into certainty. The fake HOA police were part of something engineered, not random, not spontaneous, but orchestrated. He knew what came next: infiltration. For 3 nights, Elias barely slept. His mind replayed the pieces over and over, connecting dots others would miss. The language patterns in Ridge's communications, the timing of his outreach to community leaders, the sophisticated encryption masking amateur behavior, it all pointed to one conclusion: Ridge had law enforcement training, and that realization opened a door Elias hadn't wanted to walk through. Because if Ridge was a former cop, soldier, or even an ex-federal operative, this wasn't just about manipulation, it was about revenge. Someone with a vendetta against the system, turning ordinary citizens into pawns in a personal war. Elias began digging through internal archives, cross-referencing old personnel lists, disciplinary records, and sealed dismissals. It didn't take long before he found a match. Raymond R. Ridge Holman, former Homeland Security liaison, discharged 7 years ago after an internal corruption probe exposed unauthorized surveillance activities. The file said terminated without pension. The reports noted an increasing fixation with authority structures and neighborhood control. In other words, Ridge hadn't disappeared. He'd simply shifted his battlefield. Elias leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Everything made sense now: the fake badges, the pseudo-legal rhetoric, the obsession with local power. Ridge had reinvented himself as a digital prophet of order, weaponizing people like Gloria to enforce his vision of controlled communities. But Ridge had made one mistake: he'd targeted a neighborhood that housed a man who could see through the facade. The Bureau authorized a new phase of the operation, and Elias took the lead. Codenamed Operation Glasshouse, its objective was to expose Ridge's entire network. Using Gloria's seized devices as bait, Elias would pose as a cooperative recruit, feeding Ridge just enough information to make contact. It was dangerous, delicate, and deeply personal. Late one night, Elias sat in the dim glow of his computer, crafting a message under Gloria's old encrypted handle. He used her tone, her phrasing, even her erratic punctuation. Commander, situation at Crestwood contained. Infiltrator neutralized. Requesting guidance for next phase. He hit send. Then he waited. The reply came just before dawn. Good, stay silent. Phase 2 begins soon. The others will follow your example. Attached was a new list, addresses, names, and photos of other neighborhoods Ridge had infiltrated. Elias's stomach tightened as he scrolled. The scale was massive, entire clusters of HOA boards, neighborhood watches, and private security consultants manipulated under the guise of protecting community values. This wasn't just radicalization. It was structural infection. As Elias studied the list, a faint sound pulled his attention to the window. A car idled in the distance, dark, unmarked, engine humming softly. He watched as it lingered for a moment, then slowly rolled away. He'd seen that behavior before counter-surveillance. Someone was watching him. He knew Ridge would be cautious. Someone like that didn't trust digital communication forever. If Elias had reached out, Ridge would be verifying who was really on the other end. That night, Elias's phone buzzed with an unknown message. No text, just an image, a screenshot of Elias standing outside his own house, taken from across the street. Beneath it, 3 words. Nice neighborhood, agent. It wasn't a threat. It was a game. Ridge wanted him all to know he was being watched, that the hunter was now under observation. But Elias wasn't easily shaken. He'd faced terrorists, assassins, and cartel leaders who'd made similar moves. The difference here was proximity. Ridge wasn't operating from a bunker overseas. He was here, in the same world of fences, lawns, and neighborhood meetings. The next day, Elias coordinated an off-grid surveillance setup. Hidden cameras along the main routes in and out of Crestwood Lakes. Motion-triggered sensors in the nearby woods. Drone coverage sweeping beyond the perimeter. Ridge was circling closer, and Elias intended to let him, but only far enough to expose himself. Meanwhile, the Bureau prepared for containment across multiple states. Each location on Ridge's list was now under quiet federal watch, waiting for a signal. By the 4th night, Elias had gathered enough intelligence to predict Ridge's next move. He wasn't just observing, he was testing the boundaries. Ridge was methodically probing Elias's defenses, timing his responses, mapping his reaction patterns. The former agent had become the perfect predator, but Elias was a hunter too. On the 5th night, Ridge made his boldest move yet. Elias's security feed detected motion behind his property, a single figure dressed in dark tactical gear, approaching the same shed Gloria's group had once targeted. No fake badge this time. This was precise, practiced, professional. Elias watched silently, his heart steady. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't call it in. He simply whispered into his earpiece. Targets on site. Begin lockdown. Within seconds, the neighborhood's quiet was shattered by the hum of drones and the silent convergence of agents moving in from all directions. Ridge had taken the bait. Through the window, Elias caught a glimpse of the intruder's silhouette, illuminated by the motion lights, methodical, deliberate, confident. But as the figure turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps, Elias saw the reflection of his own trap play out perfectly. This wasn't just an arrest anymore. It was retribution, the end of the game Ridge had started years ago. As federal agents closed in, the figure darted for the woods, but Elias was already moving. The same calm precision he'd shown the day Gloria tried to arrest him now guided his every step. Ridge had hunted from the shadows long enough. Tonight, the shadows belonged to Elias. The forest behind Crestwood Lakes was silent except for the rustle of leaves and the rhythmic crunch of boots against damp soil. The night was heavy with tension, the air sharp and electric, the kind that always came just before a storm or a capture. Elias Ward moved like a ghost through the trees. Every instinct he'd honed over 2 decades in the Bureau came alive in that moment. His breathing steady, his eyes locked forward. Every motion calculated, quiet, lethal if necessary. Somewhere ahead, Raymond Ridge Holman was running the same man who had puppeteered entire neighborhoods into chaos, who had turned ordinary citizens into enforcers of delusion and hate. But now, Stripped of his network and his screen, Ridge was just another fugitive stumbling through the dark. Elias's team had already sealed off the roads and intersections surrounding Crestwood Lakes. Ridge had nowhere to go. The forest wasn't an escape route, it was a trap disguised as freedom. The chase stretched on for minutes that felt like hours. Ridge was fast, trained, and desperate, a dangerous combination. But Elias knew desperation always came with mistakes. And Ridge made his first one when he turned toward the creek that bordered the neighborhood's edge. The shallow water reflected faint moonlight, beautiful, but betraying. Elias saw Ridge's outline, his shoulders hunched, his breath visible in the cold. For a moment, Ridge paused, scanning the tree line, listening for movement. But Elias was already there, watching, waiting. The bureau team surrounded from three sides, closing in silently until the forest itself seemed to tighten. Ridge realized too late that he was boxed in. He spun, eyes flashing with that familiar arrogance, the same arrogance that had driven him to play God in suburban America. Elias stepped into view, calm and composed, his presence cutting through the chaos like gravity itself. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to draw his weapon. His authority came not from fear but from control. Ridge froze. Then, like a cornered animal, he ran again. He didn't get far. A drone's spotlight snapped on, slicing through the darkness and pinning him in a cold white beam. The agents advanced, their movements surgical and silent. Ridge stopped, hands trembling, face twisted not in fear but fury. In that blinding light, Elias could finally see the man who had haunted the edges of his case for weeks. Ridge wasn't a monster, he was what happened when obsession met failure. The lines on his face told a story of a man who once believed he was the protector of order, only to become its destroyer. As the cuffs clicked around Ridge's wrists, he spat words Elias didn't need to hear. Words about control, freedom, and the corruption of the system. The same tired rhetoric that had infected countless minds across the country. But Elias didn't respond. He didn't give Ridge the satisfaction of debate. He simply turned away, letting the forest reclaim the sound. The arrest was over in less than 5 minutes. The war behind it had taken years to reach this moment. Back at his home, as dawn began to creep over the horizon, Elias sat in silence. His house was quiet again. The neighborhood, still under lockdown, looked peaceful, almost eerily so. The same streets that had once been patrolled by fake officers and delusional neighbors were now lined with unmarked bureau vehicles, quiet order. The sun rose slowly over Crestwood Lakes, washing the last remnants of the nightmare in pale gold. For the first time in weeks, Elias allowed himself to breathe. But victory, for him, never felt like celebration. It felt like silence, the kind that followed storms, funerals, or endings too heavy for applause. Over the next several days, the news exploded. Fake HOA police leader captured in FBI sting. Former Homeland Security officer exposed as domestic extremist. Neighborhood vigilante movement unmasked. Every network wanted a piece of the story. Every headline tried to simplify it to make it sound like the capture of one man had ended the threat. But Elias knew better. Ridge had been a symptom, not the disease. The digital forums continued to stir. Other self-proclaimed commanders were still out there, some in hiding, others trying to erase their traces. The Bureau would chase them in due time. For now, Elias's job was done, at least on paper. He spent the following week repairing what the ordeal had broken. His home, his peace, his trust in the place he had chosen to live quietly after years of service. The neighbors began to approach him differently now, cautiously respectful, some embarrassed, some grateful. The same people who had whispered about him, who had assumed the worst when Gloria accused him, now offered small gestures of apology. A wave, a thank you, a plate of cookies left by the door. Elias accepted the gestures, but he didn't dwell on them. He knew fear made people do strange things. The same fear that had once kept him alive in the field had turned others into followers of false authority. A week later, while reviewing the final report, Elias received a sealed envelope at his door, no return address, just his name in precise handwriting. Inside was a single photo. Gloria went, sitting in a courtroom, head bowed. Beneath it, a brief note from the Bureau's legal division. Accepted a plea deal. Cooperation in exchange for testimony against Ridge's network. Elias stared at the photo for a long time. He didn't feel anger anymore, just quiet understanding. She had been a tool in someone else's hand, a believer who wanted order so badly she forgot what justice meant. He set the photo down and looked out his window. The lake behind his property rippled gently under the morning light. For once, the reflection looking back at him wasn't the agent, the enforcer, or the target. It was simply Elias Ward, a man who had survived another war no one would ever fully understand. Weeks later, the Bureau held a private debrief. Operation Glasshouse was officially declared a success. Dozens of fake neighborhood enforcement groups were dismantled, and Ridge's digital infrastructure was seized. The files revealed recruitment methods, propaganda manuals, and contact lists spanning multiple states. But the most disturbing discovery came from Ridge's personal archive, a manifesto draft titled The Rebuilding of Order. It outlined a future where private citizens governed their own territories through structured control, where traditional law enforcement was replaced by community sovereignty. In his warped vision, Ridge had sought to turn the American suburb into a miniature state, one that answered to him. As Elias read those words, he understood the magnitude of what had been stopped. Ridge hadn't been playing with fake badges and bylaws. He'd been testing the foundation of democracy itself, starting with one HOA at a time. That night, Elias returned home to find the neighborhood in its old rhythm again. Kids played by the lake, lawnmowers buzzed, the mail truck rattled past. Life, ordinary and fragile, had returned. He sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, the faint hum of normalcy wrapping around him like a long-forgotten blanket. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to let go. The fake HOA police were gone. The mastermind behind them was in custody, and the most feared FBI agent in the Bureau had once again disappeared into the quiet life he had always wanted. But deep down, Elias knew this wouldn't be the last time order and chaos danced this close together. He knew the human hunger for control, for power, would always find new disguises. Still, as the sun dipped low and the world turned golden, he allowed himself one small moment of peace. Because sometimes, surviving the storm was victory enough. Crestwood Lakes had learned its lesson the hard way. Authority isn't in the badge, or the uniform, or the rules written on paper. It's in the truth that outlasts all of it. And as the wind rustled through the trees and the lake shimmered like glass, Elias Ward closed his eyes. The hunter, the target, the man who turned fear into justice and finally rested.